Dangerously honest advice from the most controversial philosopher in history. What if I told you that everything you've been taught about being good, fair, or even nice might be the very thing holding you back? What if the rules you've been following, the ones society drilled into you, always be kind, always be humble, always put others first, are the exact same ones that keep you stuck, powerless and frustrated? Niccolò Machiavelli, one of history's most controversial thinkers, would tell you this outright. And his advice isn't for the faint of heart. Machiavelli didn't believe in illusions. He didn't sugarcoat the world, and he certainly didn't have time for polite lies. Instead, he gave us the kind of advice that cuts straight to the truth, advice so brutally honest that it's been misunderstood, criticized, and feared for centuries. But it's also advice that, if you truly understand it, could change your life. Let's start with the most dangerous question of all. Do you want to be loved, or do you want to be respected? Be honest with yourself for a moment. Most of us have been taught to seek love, approval, and validation at all costs. We want to be liked. We want people to think highly of us. But Machiavelli would argue that this is a trap. Why? Because love, he said, is fickle. It's conditional. People will love you when it's convenient for them, but the moment things get tough, that love can disappear. Respect, however, is something entirely different. Respect is rooted in strength. It's earned, not given. And once you have it, it's far harder for others to take it away. Machiavelli's most famous work, The Prince, is often seen as a guide for rulers, but its lessons aren't just for kings and politicians, they're for anyone who wants to take control of their life. He tells us that the world is chaotic and unpredictable. People will betray you. Circumstances will shift. And if you're not prepared to adapt, you will lose. This isn't pessimism, it's reality. And the sooner you accept it, the sooner you can start playing the game of life on your own terms. But let's make this practical. Think about your own life. How many times have you sacrificed your own needs or values just to keep the peace? How often have you avoided conflict, stayed silent, or gone along with something just because you wanted to be liked? And what did it cost you? Your time? Your dignity? Your dreams? Machiavelli would argue that this is one of the greatest mistakes you can make, because in trying to please everyone, you lose yourself. Here's the hard truth Machiavelli wants you to face: you can't win at life if you're afraid to make enemies. Let that sink in for a moment. This doesn't mean you should go out of your way to create conflict or be cruel. But it does mean that if you're constantly prioritizing harmony over truth or approval over authenticity, you're playing a losing game.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Think about this. Have you ever seen someone who's universally liked? Someone who never takes risks, never says anything controversial, never challenges the status quo? Chances are they're also someone who's stuck, invisible, or easily ignored. Why? Because playing it safe might keep you out of trouble, but it also keeps you from standing out. Machiavelli would tell you that greatness, the kind that earns respect and leaves a legacy, isn't built on pleasing others. It's built on making bold, decisive moves, even if they ruffle a few feathers along the way. But here's the deeper question: are you willing to accept the cost of being true to yourself? Because there's always a cost. People won't always like you. Some might even turn against you. But Machiavelli would remind you that the alternative, the cost of living a life that isn't truly yours, is far greater. Why playing nice can be your biggest weakness. Machiavelli's guide to strength and strategy. Let's dive deeper into one of Machiavelli's most misunderstood ideas. Being nice doesn't make you strong, it makes you vulnerable. This is where so many of us get trapped. We're told from a young age to play nice, to avoid conflict, to be agreeable and polite. And while kindness can be a virtue, Machiavelli teaches us that kindness without strength is a weakness that others can exploit. Think about the world we live in. It's competitive, it's chaotic. People don't always act in good faith, and not everyone has your best interests at heart. Machiavelli wasn't cynical, he was realistic. He understood that power dynamics are everywhere in politics, in the workplace, even in your friendships and family. And if you approach life with nothing but blind kindness, you're handing your power over to others. Here's the brutal truth: people will take advantage of you if you let them. This doesn't mean everyone is out to get you, but Machiavelli would argue that you need to assume the worst while still hoping for the best. Why? Because hope alone won't protect you. Strategy will. Let me ask you a question. How many times have you gone along with something just because you didn't want to upset anyone? Maybe you agreed to extra work when you were already overwhelmed. Maybe you stayed silent when someone disrespected you. Or maybe you let someone else take credit for your ideas. And why? Because being nice felt safer than standing your ground. But here's what Machiavelli would tell you: safety is an illusion. When you sacrifice your boundaries to keep the peace, you're not actually avoiding harm, you're inviting it. People learn how to treat you based on what you tolerate. And if you're always agreeable, always accommodating, they'll see you as someone they can control or overlook. This is why Machiavelli believed that strength and strategy are more important than niceness. He wasn't saying you should be cruel or manipulative, far from it. He was saying that you need to balance kindness with power. You need to be as strong as you are compassionate, as strategic as you are generous. Without that balance, your kindness will be exploited and your generosity will be taken for granted. Here's an example. Imagine you're in a workplace where you're constantly asked to take on extra tasks. You say yes every time because you want to be helpful and avoid conflict. But over time, what happens? You become overworked, undervalued, and resentful. Meanwhile, others might start to see you as a pushover, someone who will always say yes, even at their own expense. Machiavelli would tell you to break that cycle by learning to say no, not out of anger or defiance, but out of self-respect. He believed that strength isn't just about physical power or dominance, it's about knowing your worth and refusing to compromise it. When you say no to things that don't serve you, you're not being unkind, you're setting boundaries that protect your time, energy, and dignity. But let's take this a step further. Machiavelli also believed that appearances matter. This is one of his most controversial ideas, but it's also one of his most practical. He argued that how others perceive you is just as important as what you're actually capable of. If you project confidence, strength, and competence, people will respect you even if they don't always like you. So, how do you apply this in your life? Start by asking yourself, what image am I projecting to the world? Are you coming across as someone who's strong, decisive, and self-assured? Or are you giving off the impression that you're unsure, passive, or easily swayed? This isn't about being fake, it's about aligning your outward actions with your inner strength. Here's another question to consider: do people see you as someone who can be trusted but not crossed? This is the balance Machiavelli urged us to strike. Be someone who's fair, kind, and reliable, but also someone who isn't afraid to stand their ground when it matters. This brings us to one of Machiavelli's most famous ideas: is it better to be loved or feared? Most people would instinctively choose love, but Machiavelli's answer was far more nuanced. He believed that, ideally, you should aim to be both loved and feared. But if you had to choose, fear is more reliable. Why? Because love is conditional, it depends on emotions, which can change in an instant. Fear, on the other hand, is rooted in respect. It's not about making people afraid of you in a cruel or tyrannical way, it's about showing them that you're not to be taken lightly. Now, take a moment and think, are you someone who's respected, or are you someone who's merely liked? If you're constantly playing nice, avoiding conflict, and putting others' needs ahead of your own, chances are you're sacrificing respect for likability. And while it might feel good in the short term, it's not sustainable. Machiavelli would tell you to flip the script. Stop worrying so much about being liked. Focus on being strong, strategic, and self-respecting. Because when you respect yourself, others will follow suit. The power of control, how Machiavelli teaches you to master your environment. Niccolò Machiavelli believed one of the greatest strengths a person can cultivate is the ability to control their environment, or at least control how they respond to it. To him, life wasn't about passively accepting your circumstances, it was about actively shaping them to suit your goals. And this lesson, perhaps more than any other, is why his advice remains so powerful and so controversial centuries later. Here's the hard truth, that Machiavelli understood the world doesn't care about your intentions, it only cares about your results. You might be the kindest, most hardworking, most deserving person in the room, but if you can't influence your environment, none of that matters. Success in any area of life requires more than good intentions. It requires strategy. Think about your own life for a moment. How often do you let external circumstances dictate your actions? How often do you say, I can't do X because of Y, or I'll wait until the right time? Machiavelli would tell you that waiting for the perfect moment is a losing game. Why? Because the perfect moment doesn't exist. The world is chaotic, unpredictable, and often unfair. If you're waiting for the stars to align, you'll be waiting forever. Instead, Machiavelli teaches us to take control by understanding the forces at play in our environment and using them to our advantage. This starts with a brutally honest assessment of your situation. Ask yourself, what's within my control and what isn't? Too often, we waste time and energy fighting battles we can't win, while ignoring the opportunities right in front of us. Machiavelli believed that success comes from focusing on what you can control and adapting to what you can't. He called this ability virtue, not in the moral sense, but in the sense of skill, courage, and decisiveness. A person with virtue doesn't sit back and hope for the best. They take bold, calculated actions to shape their destiny, even in the face of uncertainty. But here's the catch: control doesn't mean dominating others. It doesn't mean manipulating or deceiving people for personal gain. Machiavelli's advice is often misinterpreted as promoting ruthless, unethical behavior, but that's not the case. What he really teaches is that power without wisdom is useless. True control isn't about forcing your will on others, it's about understanding the dynamics of power and using them intelligently. Let's make this practical. Think about a situation in your life where you feel powerless. Maybe it's a toxic work environment, a difficult relationship, or a personal goal that feels out of reach. Ask yourself, what would Machiavelli do in this situation? He wouldn't complain. He wouldn't wait for someone else to fix it. He would assess the situation, identify his leverage points, and take action. For example, if you're stuck in a job where you feel undervalued, Machiavelli wouldn't tell you to quit impulsively or suffer in silence. He would tell you to play the game strategically, build your skills, expand your network, and position yourself for something better. And when the time is right, make your move. But here's the deeper lesson: control starts with self-control. If you can't master your emotions, your impulses, or your fears, you'll never be able to master your environment. Machiavelli understood that humans are driven by passion ambition, and desire, but he also knew that these forces can destroy us if we don't keep them in check. Let me ask you, how often do your emotions control your decisions? How often do you act out of fear, anger, or frustration, only to regret it later? Machiavelli would remind you that emotions are powerful, but they're also temporary. To make wise decisions, you need to step back, think strategically, and act with purpose, not react impulsively. This idea ties into one of Machiavelli's most famous lessons: fortune favors the prepared. He believed that while luck plays a role in life, it's not something you should rely on. Instead, you should prepare yourself so that when opportunities arise or challenges strike, you're ready to act. This is where control and strategy intersect. Life is unpredictable, but the more prepared you are, the more you can turn chaos into opportunity. Here's an example. Imagine two people facing the same challenge, say, losing their job. The first person panics, blames the world, and waits for someone to rescue them. The second person, armed with Machiavelli's wisdom, sees the situation as an opportunity. They assess their skills, leverage their connections, and take decisive action to create a better future. Which person do you think comes out ahead? This is the essence of Machiavelli's philosophy. You can't control everything, but you can control how you respond. And in doing so, you can shape your reality in ways others can't. So let me ask you, what's one area of your life where you've been waiting for change instead of creating it? What's one step you can take today to reclaim your power, even if it's small? Remember, Machiavelli's advice isn't about being ruthless, it's about being realistic. It's about recognizing the world for what it is, not what you wish it were, and then using that knowledge to build a life of strength, purpose, and fulfillment. The Machiavellian mindset: how to balance power and ethics in a chaotic world. One of the biggest misconceptions about Machiavelli is that he advocated for cruelty and deceit. But that's not true. His philosophy isn't about abandoning ethics, it's about understanding the delicate balance between morality and practicality. In a chaotic world, Machiavelli believed that power and survival often require tough decisions. The real question is, how do you pursue your goals without losing your integrity? Machiavelli never argued that being unethical was the key to success. Instead, he taught that rigid morality, when practiced without wisdom, can be self-destructive. Think about it. How often do people cling to doing what's right in a way that blinds them to reality? For example, someone might refuse to stand up for themselves at work because they want to avoid confrontation, even though this passivity allows others to walk all over them. Machiavelli would call this a failure, not virtue. He believed that true ethics require adaptability. Sometimes, to protect your values, you have to bend the rules of idealism. He famously wrote, "The ends justify the means." This doesn't mean anything goes. It means that achieving meaningful goals sometimes requires actions that others might judge harshly. The key is to act with purpose and understand the consequences. Let's make this practical. Imagine you're in a leadership position and need to make a difficult decision, one that might upset people in the short term, but will create long-term benefits. Many would avoid it out of fear of backlash, clinging to the illusion that being liked is the same as being effective. But Machiavelli would urge you to prioritize outcomes over appearances. He'd remind you that being decisive, even if it's unpopular, earns respect. At the same time, Machiavelli warned against unnecessary cruelty or dishonesty. He believed that power built on fear alone is fragile. If people distrust or despise you, they'll eventually find ways to undermine you. The ideal leader or individual balances strength with fairness. They project authority while maintaining trust. Here's the lesson for your own life: you don't have to choose between power and ethics, they can coexist. Stand firm in your values, but don't let them make you naive. Be kind, but don't let kindness make you weak. Be honest, but recognize when withholding the full truth is wiser. This balance is where strength lies. Now, ask yourself, in the pursuit of your goals, are you too rigid or too passive? Are you sacrificing your success for the sake of comfort, or compromising your ethics for the sake of power? Machiavelli's mindset teaches us to navigate these questions with clarity. True success isn't about being ruthless or overly idealistic. It's about being strategic, adaptable, and deeply intentional. When you embrace this mindset, you don't just survive chaos, you thrive in it. The world is chaotic, yes, but with the right balance of power and ethics, you can master it. You'll move,